Hello and welcome to the participants. People are still coming in, but I think we should start. We have an hour's program. Thank you so much for joining. It's probably good night, good evening, good afternoon, or even good morning for all the participants. So thank you for taking the time to join this webinar on the title, Understanding the Global Pharmacy Supply Chain for Hospital Pharmacies. Please, the next slide, please. I'm Rob Moss. I'm currently the immediate past president of the FIP Hospital Pharmacy section, and I will be the moderator of this webinar, which has excellent faculty. But before we start that, we have to do a few household announcements. So first of all, this webinar is being recorded and will be live streamed via YouTube. The recording will be available on the website of FIP, and you are very welcome to ask questions. It's part of the setup, but please do ask them in the Q&A box and not in the regular chat box. You are, of course, very welcome to provide feedback later, and most of all, we would really like you to join our community. If you're not already a member of FIP, please do so and join the hospital pharmacy and larger global pharmaceutical community. Thank you very much. So, as I said, we have a very good faculty with experts in the field. They will be introducing themselves later because it'll start with an introduction. But Julie Chang, very welcome from Taiwan. Sohail Fitin from the United Arab Emirates, and Michael Gainio from the USA. They will be introducing themselves a little later. So further ado, we're starting. The learning objectives of this webinar are, first of all, to be able to describe the current global pharmacy supply chain, to compare the contrasts, the different threats to the pharmacy supply chain has, such as drug shortages, natural disasters, and counterfeit medicines, but also understand how these threats can interrupt the supply chain. And the form we have chosen is a Q&A form. So we'll be looking at the panel's members' perspective and countries and outline how to create a resilient supply chain and future endeavors taking place to protect the supply chain. For instance, automation and technology. Next slide, please. So to start with the introduction, we've seen, well, COVID-19, I think, has been a major factor that really has made it even more clear that we have a global supply chain, and that was disrupted if there are major events going on at a worldwide level. I think we've all been used to shortages. We've all been, adapting to supply chain problems, but COVID-19 has really shown that either transport problems that arise from lockdowns, but also increased demand, all at the same time at a global level, which was unprecedented, have shown that it is a really interdependent global supply chain. And part of what we had been seeing in recent years is that indeed it has become more and more interdependent because there are fewer production sites on the active pharmaceutical ingredients, but also fewer production sites for finished pharmaceutical products. So having fewer of these sites means they are more concentrated, and therefore it means we are all interdependent because they have to be transported to one place or another. They have to be linked up, but also the supply and demand has to be linked up globally. And we're seeing two major parts of it. One is the small molecules and the generics, and the drive is to make these cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, therefore efficiency is extremely important. But how do you reach efficiency? By having bulk productions and having just-in-time deliveries. Well, just-in-time deliveries are perfect and very efficient, but as soon as there are supply errors, it will lead to a shortage. And if we talk about small molecules, and in fewer and fewer countries are making, using these smaller molecules and making products from them. And just to have more of these small molecules and getting this back into the supply chain will take about 3 to 6 weeks. And that, of course, if there is transport. And on the other hand, there are the biologicals and the more complex molecules, which are so sophisticated to make that it is extremely expensive to make this. So the technological knowledge to be able to operate sites that produce these pharmaceutical products with biological and complex molecules is so expensive, you have to concentrate them on certain points. And so there too, you have few production sites that are very, very highly controlled. But also, when there is an increased demand, as we have been seeing recently from COVID or other single factors that really make the demand focus on a certain product, these few production sites cannot just produce and overnight produce a new product or more product. And therefore it'll lead to a shortage. Also, in a highly technical environment, if there is a variance in the production, it means you have a production problem, and these 1 or 2 sites are then stopped. So it all contributes to problems leading to shortages. And with complex and biological molecules, it's not just that you sort of get new active pharmaceutical ingredient. It can take 6 to 9 months to really set up a new site or to have it cleared by the FDA or the European Medicines Agency or WHO, whatever qualifying group there is. So, and if you would like to switch to more and more production, it could take years to have new factories building that. So all in all, we have a really highly dependent global supply chain, and there is no global demand regulation. It's good. It's different countries, different regions looking at the supply and trying to get their own supply. And I think we've all seen in COVID, it has not brought out the best in some countries. There were countries that were really trying to get things for their population, which of course is very rightful, but it did lead to quite a lot of inequality in the supply. But this is setting the larger picture. It is showing that we really do have a global supply chain with its interdependencies. The form that we've chosen for this webinar is having a panel discussion with, as Bill explained, the faculty, very knowledgeable people in the field of supply chain. And we will be talking through, but please fill out your question and answers in the Q&A box, and we will take that into the discussion. And after about 50 minutes, we will have a wrap up and start ending it. But I hope you have a very interesting webinar, that you learn a lot from it, that you get the learning objectives. And again, we hope to see you as part of the FIP community. So without further ado, please could I have the next slide? And Julie, could I ask you to shortly introduce yourself?
Okay. Thank you, Rob, for your kind introduction. It's my great pleasure having this opportunity to join this webinar. I serve as a principal investigator of the National Drug Shortage Project for 5 years in Taiwan, and a hospital pharmacy director in a 3,000 inpatient bed, 10,000 outpatient service volume medical center, Taipei Veterans General Hospital. Today, I would like to share my experience from 2 different perspectives. I'm now the executive director of Taiwan Society of Health System Pharmacists. I started to join the task force of Taiwan National Drug Shortage Management Project since 2015. Let me quickly introduce the national project in Taiwan. Since 2011, TSHP has been authorized by Taiwan FDA to work collaboratively with different stakeholders to initiate a national drug shortage project, which serves as the official mechanism for managing drug supply and shortage across Taiwan. We work collaboratively with government agencies, healthcare institutions, pharmaceutical manufacturers, and medical societies to establish a multidimensional network for reporting, evaluating, and information disclosure to assist for managing drug shortage. All the stakeholders are connected by the project-driven mechanism. I will share with you more detail about what we have done, especially during the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. And Sohail, please could I invite you to present yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to be with this group as I could not attend FEB during the COVID and in the last 3-4 years. As I have been working for more than 40 years in pharmaceutical care, supply chain, cold chain, and quality management, and healthcare management. Half of the years, almost 23 years, I spent it at King Faisal Specialist Hospital, generation, 23 years old.
We seem to be having a connection problem here. While that is being fixed, Michael, please could you introduce yourself?
Yes, my pleasure. Good morning. Well, here in the United States, it's morning, so it's nice to meet everyone. My name is Michael Gagno. I'm Senior Director of Pharmacy Practice and Quality with the American Society of Health System Pharmacists. I spent about 16 years of my career in hospital pharmacy in various areas, including clinical pharmacy and administration, and some brief stint in informatics. And so I've seen the effect of shortages in the supply chain on all aspects of patient care, including medication safety and how we incorporate those shortages into our health records and prompt clinicians to steer them toward alternatives. As my role within ASHP, I am our subject matter expert on things related to drug shortages and the drug supply chain. And we do a lot of advocacy with our Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, within our legal system, our legislation to get laws passed to try to increase the resiliency of the supply chain to address some of the root causes that Rob mentioned for supply chain. But then also to look at the quality of the products in the supply chain. There have been a lot of recalls in recent years due to nitrosamine impurities, at least here in the United States. Things like our angiotensin receptor blockers, or the ARBs, the blood pressure medications in particular, have been problematic, but also drugs like ranitidine, metformin have also had nitrosamine impurities. And so we look at the supply chain and the resilience in the supply chain from the entire scope of it, not just the availability of the medication, but what's the quality of the medication that is available. So I look forward to the discussion, and I thank you all for the invitation and the honor of joining you this morning.
Great, wonderful having you. Sohail, I see you're rejoined. Please, can I give you the mic?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. In fact, I have many years of experience in pharmaceutical care, supply chain, cold chain, and quality management and healthcare management. During the first 23 years, I was working at King Faisal Specialist Hospital in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and where I joined as a junior until I became the director of pharmacy at King Faisal Specialist Hospital, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The other 20 years of my experience, I have worked in United Arab Emirates between governmental and private hospitals. Some of these years, like about 7 years, 7 to 10 years as director of pharmacy and consultant with the Canadian company. And then supply chain, the supply chain in the United Arab Emirates is a little unique than others. United Arab Emirates consists of 7 emirates, and Abu Dhabi is the capital, where I work as for 5 years as director of supply chain. You know, we have the where the tender is done with the pharmaceutical company, and then all the governmental hospital, which is about 20 hospitals between Abu Dhabi, Al Ain, and the Western region, and we have healthcare medical centers where we provide all the supply to them. During the COVID, we have faced a little problem that we were seeing that the supply of morphine and fentanyl may drop to a problem. And then we were able to obtain them from near countries like India and also from Russia, where it keeps us in the good level of supply chain. We have not noticed late counterfeit medication, and we have the lately supply chain company, and that supply chain company is now covering almost more than 20 hospital centers in the Northern Emirates, excluding Sharjah, but all the Emirates and also the Western region and Abu Dhabi Emirates. That we were able to share the supply among these hospitals, like Ital. We can borrow from the others, and we can cover the hospital where we keep the supply running.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And indeed, you already mentioned that COVID-19. It was interesting to find out when we were preparing this that the Emirates seemed very prepared by having large stocks. Could I ask Julie, because you mentioned you have arranged it at a national level?
Yeah.
And what happened during COVID there? Are there, well, shortly to see indeed how did it work, and are there lessons that other hospital pharmacists or countries can learn from that?
Okay. Actually, I just introduced, we have a platform, and we also have a task force to deal with problem. So when we face this challenge, actually, in the government, we have set up a ground rule to prohibit to order excess amount of drugs. Actually, when in the early phase of the pandemic, we found that there is some stockpiling behavior in the regional hospital. So we suggest the government to set up the ground rule. So they announce you cannot order the amount compared to previous year. You cannot exceed 10% over last year. If you want to order more drugs, you need to get approval from the government. So that is an effective way to, stop this stockpiling behavior. Yeah. So actually, there are a lot of efforts we have do in the pandemic, and also we have conduct a national-wide survey to know what kind of drug will be in shortage. In the hospital, we also have survey for our supplier to foresee what kind of drug will be in shortage, and we can find alternative in advance. Yeah. So also, in the early phase, a lot of drugs such as hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, they are suspect to be effective. So the doctor will firstly to get the drug prescribed for themselves. So we found this phenomena. So we start to set prescribing restriction and prioritize this agent for inpatient treatment. So this is can stop this kind of behavior. And we also banning the medication from self-purchase and set limitation on the duration of use. So that's what we have done in Taiwan.
Yeah, so it sounds like a really quite a central way that everybody was really cooperating together, which apparently works in your country, which is really wonderful. And I think it is the answer. And I'm looking at Michael while we're sitting there, because I can see a continent there in the United States, which is probably, so I'm very interested in the approaches that were used in the United States.
Yeah, and we have similar systems where allocation of what you can buy is generally set at 100% or 110%, as Yuli mentioned. And the problem we had with that during COVID is, especially New York City, was a very concentrated amount of COVID-19, and the rest of the country at this point had not really been affected. But because of, at the time, not really knowing how to take care of COVID-19 patients, we were putting them on mechanical ventilators very early. And that drove a demand for drugs like fentanyl, cisatracurium, atracurium, propofol, ketamine, and that 100%, 110% of your historical value went out the window. It was no longer applicable because you had 500 to 600% increase in your patients. And so we have this model where you prevent hoarding or stockpiling by implementing these allocations, and it works in the face of a traditional shortage when you have a disruption in the supply of the drug. But when you have an increase in the demand, that model breaks down because there's no one to determine, well, is this appropriate increase in purchasing because you have an increase in patients, or is it an increase in purchases because you're stockpiling or you're trying to hoard the medication? We actually have the exact same thing happening right now in the United States. We have a large outbreak in respiratory viral infections in pediatrics, particularly RSV or respiratory syncytial virus. And with that, we're seeing a very large increase in demand for amoxicillin. And even though you don't treat a viral infection with an antibiotic like amoxicillin, it's still causing a large increase in demand. And so we have a shortage. And it's pretty rare that a shortage is because of increase in demand, and it calls for a different way of looking at the shortage. And so nationally in Taiwan, you were able to come up with something that helped. In the United States, we had to have individual hospitals working with the drug manufacturers, reporting in daily, here's our ICU numbers, this is how many patients we have on a ventilator. And then they would work out direct shipments from the manufacturer, which is a little unusual. So COVID-19 exposed several ways that our supply chain system, Rob, you mentioned in the introduction, the just-in-time inventory. So there are clearly vulnerabilities with just-in-time inventory, but also this system of allocations of 100% of or 110% of purchases, it doesn't always work.
Yeah. And so you've mentioned quite a few quick fixes that work, but what sort of are there things that you sort of say this is what you at a hospital level is really think of that? Because indeed it all sounds like, and as I mentioned, it would be great if we had a sort of a global system at looking at supply and demand, which of course is never possible. But what are the ways that hospitals that I can imagine, because you have a great organization in Taiwan, in United Emirates, and in the United States. But when you're an individual hospital where there is no coverage at a national level, what would you suggest there? What could they do?
It's very challenging at the hospital level, and it comes down to your individual team that manages inventory to look for early signs of a shortage and to start implementing plans to deal with a shortage. So what is your therapeutic alternative? I assume this is the case in a lot of other countries, but there may be multiple dosage forms. So I mentioned amoxicillin. There are 2 different concentrations of amoxicillin available. There are different bottle sizes. What do you have that you can get in from your wholesaler, and how do you drive the prescriptions or the prescribers to use those products? So it's a complex system involving different disciplines and nurses, doctors, the pharmacists, of course, and then potentially electronic health records. But at an individual hospital level, it's very difficult. There's a lot of working together. Hospitals will reach out to others in the region, and if it's a shortage of a very common medication, they may be able to develop a strategy so that there's equal use within the city. But if it's a very rarely used medication, sometimes they will share inventory with other hospitals. But it's a problem that while it affects those small hospitals and regional hospitals, it's a global issue that really needs to be solved, and that's not something the hospital can do on their own.
No, and I think that's a good link to how can we solve the problem. I think we've all identified it is a global problem, and it's great. But do you think there are any developments that should be set up, sort of internationally, or collaborations that we could do? How can new technologies help there? Because or even production methods of production, is there any do you have an idea, because you seem to have it well organized, but do you see ways that we can have a more optimal system in a global system? What are your views there?
In fact, for a small country like United Arab Emirates, we have our system that we can borrow from each other. Like, in the governmental hospital, where we have the control of the supply chain system, where you can see the whole picture. You can see, and then if you notice that some health they run out of medication, you can shift some of the supply from one hospital to the other hospital, and they save it. They do have an access if it comes to the critical care medication, where they can. The reason here for this part of the world that we have access to countries where I don't know about United States.
Oh, so Lee, would you take over and have your view on the matter, on how yeah, great. Oh,
so
yeah,
okay. I think maybe there is a COVAX platform, right, to deliver the vaccine. Maybe this kind of mechanism can expand to ordinary drugs, to rational reasoning for all the essential medications. Maybe the World Health Organization or FIP can set up this kind of platform to, to equally distribute all the essential drugs. But it's a big challenge. But I think maybe every country can build up a platform, just like Taiwan. You can put all the stakeholders together to set up this kind of platform and work together to deal with this drug shortage issue, because the information transparency is very important. When you have a very good system, you can monitor and you can quickly respond to the shortage in everywhere. So in our experience, everybody can report their shortage from the platform. Then we have the task force to evaluate if it is a true shortage. If it is a true shortage, we will report to the government, and the government will take action to call a supplier or to make the pharmaceutical company to ask them to produce more drug for use. So I think build up this kind of mechanism is essential for dealing with challenge.
Michael, would you like to add some comments here?
Yeah, and I think there's some hurdles or challenges to that, and actually it ties into something I wanted to talk about, which is the drug approval and drug inspection process, which we have our Food and Drug Administration in the United States, where if that manufacturing facility or plant is not registered with the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, then you cannot bring that product in without going through some additional steps. So having a global sort of a look at the drug supply and what countries might need it, there's that extra layer of regulatory approval. And so our Food and Drug Administration does have a mutual recognition agreement program where they will look at other regulatory authorities within the European Union or in other countries that will allow break down some of those barriers that would limit the ability to share drugs across borders. And I think looking forward to the future, that's one way to go. Our National Academy of Medicine, some of you may know the National Academy of Medicine from a report a couple of decades ago called "To Err is Human." It's about medication errors and medication error reporting. That same organization released a report this summer on the global supply chain of medicines and medical products. And they actually proposed a treaty that would prohibit export bans or countries from hoarding these products. And we saw a little bit of that during COVID. We saw India had prohibited export of about 13 or 14 pharmaceutical products, whether the API form or the finished drug. We saw in Europe there were parallel export bans, and really those things just serve to prevent equitable distribution of the drugs. So we do need to look at our ability to share a product or to make sure there's distribution within across borders where the drugs are needed. The other thing I think you mentioned, Rob, a little bit was technology. And, I think as we get more sophisticated or more improved inventory management technologies, predictive analytics that can maybe look for early signals of increased demand, or where there might be an early signal of a shortage, and being able to implement something that would either prevent the shortage or to help mitigate the impact, try to prevent patient care from being affected by that shortage. And I think those are things that we're looking at. The other thing is manufacturing technology. So the traditional form manufacturing now, going from step to step to step to step in batch manufacturing. There's actually newer manufacturing technologies that make that step more efficient, and it's more responsive to a shortage. It's something that can be implemented quickly and increase in production very quickly. And it can be a little more portable as far as, you know, these giant facilities making drugs now, and these can be done in a smaller footprint. So it makes it a little bit easier to move or to set up in other areas versus where we have things very concentrated now. We have a lot of manufacturing concentrated in China and India. And so this would allow better distribution of manufacturing.
Yeah. Is that something that you're Julie, you're seeing too? That these, because I think when I'm talking about Europe, the one thing we had pre-COVID was like there was a whole setup on how the pharmaceutical industry should be organized, and actually it went right through the shredder because of COVID. Because indeed it was very clear we were too interdependent on a global system, so you had to go to smaller production, local productions within Europe, and make sure that the supply chains aren't as big, as problematic. So I hear two approaches. It's either shifting it, making less barriers if it is in certain areas, but also in spreading the manufacturing. And that is, I think, what you're saying, these new methods would allow more production sites with more continuous production, isn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah, more efficiently too. And I think I'm not sure who mentioned, you know, if a facility needs to increase production or start making a new product, that can take months to even a year before that product is available to the hospital pharmacy. And with the newer technologies, it's a faster. It's all done in continuous steps. I do want to address someone in the Q&A box talked about what I believe they intended were key starting materials, so precursors to even the API products, and those are highly concentrated in different areas of the world, and so the supply chain is dependent on those. And what we're seeing is, as I noted, the technology and the analytics, but we're seeing more transparency into the supply chain and where their vulnerabilities are. And so as the technology improves and the supply chain becomes more open and obvious, and we can address some of these areas where there are bottlenecks. And, you know, we talk about transparency within the manufacturing to know where our products are coming from and what the quality of those products are. But at the same time, we started talking about earlier about the allocations and where the drugs are going. The manufacturers would also like transparency and inventory, where things are in the supply chain, what the utilization looks like. So I think, you know, as the technologies all improve and our analytics improve, we'll have more ability to see where the drugs are, where they can be moved if they need to be shared across borders or from different hospitals, but also further upstream to know where there are vulnerabilities and how do we address those vulnerabilities.
Julie, would you?
You know, actually, Mike have say a very good description about this issue. I agree. It is very nice to build up a predictive model. You know, right now using big data or artificial intelligence technology to foresee which drug is at risk for shortage, and we can develop preventive measures in advance to mitigate shortage. I think this idea is very nice. Yeah.
And I think they're really, if we talk about what FIP and FIP members could do, is set up platforms that that is being shared. I mean, there are predictors, indeed, dosages. We in Europe, we had great difficulty because suddenly in the beginning, it was not clear what dose was going to be used. So all your predictions were sort of, we looked at other countries where they had a peak slightly earlier and thought, okay, it's happening there, so they'll be using that dose. Then we predicted here. So I think that exchange of information would be extremely useful. What are you working with? And even preparing for this lecture and reading the stories of our three panelists, for me already was very interesting to see how advanced the approaches were already. And what a pity that we hadn't been sharing that enough pre-COVID. So therefore I'm very glad with this webinar that we're at least sharing things, and that there are so many participants hopefully learning from it. And I think the one thing that FIP could do is pick this up and really address it and make it available, make this knowledge available, but also have the interaction from the different members on their approach, but also extending methods that we have been developing to these members. Ruben, Soleil, are you there? Because
yes,
I'm sure good, great.
I'm with you, but you did not give me any chance to speak.
No, please. I thought you were
in
off.
fact, I do like. Excuse me. I do like to add to what my colleague they have said. In here in the United agreement with some of the international drug manufacturer to build their plant here, produce the drugs locally inside. Besides so many local drugs factories in the United Arab Emirates, where we got to cover any shortages or any shortages or any problems with any hospitals. Beside that, we have here in Abu Dhabi, it is the governmental organization that looks at to spread the information to the government and to the private hospital to make sure that they have the knowledge if there is any shortages of medication globally, and then they make.
Oh, that's a pity. So again, changing, I think that getting the subject back to where should we be going, what should we be heading, and how does it help? Is there, Michael, you've been mentioning several techniques, and please could you elaborate it slightly more that people know what it might be coming, or that how that could be exchanged with our members, but also with member organizations so they can take things forward?
Yeah, actually, I can do that really quickly. I'd like to address something Sohail said about bringing manufacturing onto your own, in your own country. And for the United States, anything that is a controlled substance that is like a narcotic, what we would consider morphine, hydromorphone, fentanyl, those have to be produced in the United States. And yet we still have chronic shortages of these medications. So I think it's important to recognize that consolidating or concentrating manufacture anywhere in the world, no matter where that is, can still lead to problems. So we had a facility in the United States that made about 70% of our supply of morphine and hydromorphone. And when that plant had a problem, we had a national shortage of those drugs. So we hear a lot about onshoring or bringing manufacturing back, or trying to bring it into a country. But if you don't have high quality and systems that are reliable, resilient, you're still potentially going to have shortages. So we do think that a global, diverse supply chain keeps it resilient, it keeps it strong. And if there are the conflict with Russia and Ukraine, for example, if there is some disruption in that region, well, there should be other regions of the world that have the ability to make those medications. And it may not be the drug, it may be the glass vial that the drug is in. It may be some of the precursor chemicals before the API is even made. But I do think there are steps that individual countries can take to be prepared. And what we have here in the United States is we've started using some of these new advanced technologies for manufacturing to develop a stockpile of API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient that goes into making the final product. And that way, if there is a disruption, you don't have to make the product yourself. You have to have the ability to make the product if you need it. So looking forward, if there is another pandemic or there's some sort of disruption, we're prepared for some of these medications to take over the manufacturing. And I think that's something that each country can look into while still supporting a global supply chain.
So it's more like synchronizing the world production, basically, and making sure that there is, resilience in the system wherever it happens. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And there was a question also about, and I think it gets at the economics or the, some of the financial issues with shortages about, can a country force a manufacturer to produce something? And here in the United States, no, the manufacturer can decide to stop making something. And a lot of the drugs we're talking about are old generic medications. There's not a lot of profit in making them. So we need to find ways to incentivize, we're in the United States, at least, we're very capitalist. Everything is driven by the money. So we need to find a way to, as we keep driving the prices of these generics down, there needs to be some sort of incentive for manufacturers to continue to produce them.
Julie, would you?
Yeah. Let me put one point. Actually, the government of Taiwan is promoting the application of GS1 international barcode to improve the medical security. So a few hospitals in Taiwan using barcode system to improve warehouse inventory management. I think in this way, we can improve the inventory efficiency because it's auto check lot number and the expiration date, and also enhance the drug traceability. So I think the barcode system is also helpful to dealing with kind of issue.
Yeah, to make it more efficient. That. And I think no, he left it again. Well, looking at that, looking at the time too, there's of course a big threat because of having a global supply chain is also substandard and falsified medication. I don't think we should be getting into that in great detail, but one thing that it seemed that during this COVID period would have been an ideal time for a great flow of substandard and falsified medication. But is that something that you saw in your countries here as the panelists, but also perhaps the attendees? Was it a huge problem, or is that a secondary problem that wasn't enhanced, or wasn't bigger during the COVID period? And I say the link because you mentioned GS1 and barcoding, because I think many countries are now introducing systems to prevent falsified medication, but it also restricts the flow of medication, because it once defined in that system, you cannot easily transfer it to another system in another country. So perhaps you would like to mention something there. Mike?
Actually, in Taiwan, the counterfeit drugs issue is not so big because it's not allowed to flow the substandard or counterfeit drugs. So I don't think it's a big issue in Taiwan. So,
No.
so I
No.
don't have any experience here. Yeah.
And Michael,
We have a little bit of a problem with that because, again, our system is our healthcare system is monetized, right? It's there's a lot of money, and so our drugs are expensive, and a lot of patients will try to go directly online to the internet and buy drugs, and so they might be coming from sources that are not legitimate, and they may not be licensed pharmacies. So having a secure supply chain in that regard, I think, is very important. So you're not getting counterfeit medications. We have similar standards in the United States for, we have our drug supply chain security that requires, there's a trail, a paper trail for every drug from the time it leaves the manufacturer to the time it gets to the pharmacy. And that should prevent any counterfeits from being introduced into our supply chain. But again, if a patient goes online and directly purchases medicine, then it can lead to some counterfeits. That digital trail, that paper trail that follows the drug, does cause problems for being able to transfer between hospitals. So as I mentioned, there are hospitals that may share drugs in the event of a shortage, and it can act as a little bit of a barrier. It's not intended to, but it can happen. So we'll see over time enhancements to that to allow better verification between hospitals, the ability to make sure that those drugs are getting where the patients are. But it can cause some challenges there. And then I see another question about the GS1 and, is it adding cost to medicines? And the GS1 coding is just a simple barcode. Wish I could pull something from my desk here that has a barcode on it. I can't find anything, but it's a very simple, it's just a matter of printing it on the label. There are other technologies that are a little more expensive to implement. That would be the radio frequency ID tagging or RFID tagging. Those can add a little bit of expense, but really some of the manufacturers have done a really good job of bringing the cost of that down. And what those tags can do is, once you're within a health system, the drug can be tracked from location to location. It's inactive as far as it's a passive check, so that it doesn't require a user to scan the barcode. There's something in technology that will automatically read that radio frequency tag, and then you'll know where the drug is. So that's a little bit of an advanced step, but the GS1 coding for a barcode really is just a matter of printing it on the label.
Yeah, and making it very traceable. That is, as Julie said, it really helps. I see a question here too about, in developing countries, access for API manufacturing factories is a big issue. For example, in my country, Ethiopia, it was unprecedented. Then what is the best way you recommend in resolving such problems in the future pandemic period? I think we went into it a little bit, but indeed, even their APIs were difficult. Is there something we can mention here that they would?
Yeah, this is a challenge I think we all face. Not just, as I noted, there's a lot of concentrated API manufacturing, especially for the small molecule generics, Rob, that you mentioned in the introduction. It's very concentrated in a few areas of the world. And so it's not unique to Ethiopia. And I do think these advanced manufacturing technologies will make the access to those a little easier. The technology itself is expensive to implement, but we see with all new technologies that the initial costs are high. When you imagine the first flat screen TVs that came out and how expensive those were, or that, any new technology, you fast forward a couple of decades and you can go and get something very cheap that had at one point been very expensive. So hopefully over time, those technologies, the ability to implement them becomes cheaper, and that means that more countries have access to them and they can implement those. And then the problem becomes accessing the starting materials, which are also very concentrated. But this is a global problem. It's not just in developing countries.
Julie, was there something you would like to add here?
Yeah.
And We're running at the end of the program, so yeah.
For the API problem, actually, just like Mike said, is also a problem in Taiwan, because in Taiwan, China and India are the main source of API. Nearly half of Taiwan API imported from China. And actually in a realistic environment, it is practically difficult to give up the lower cost of API from India or China if we return to the free market competition. So that's the big challenge all over the world, I think. So before the ending, I like to emphasize the experience from Taiwan, a collaborative platform to integrate all the stakeholders together to work together is the key, can efficiently mitigate drug shortage. And through proactive monitoring, reporting, evaluating, announcing, and also call for supplier. So I think establish of a platform is highly recommended. Thank you.
Yes, great. And I think because we really have to wrap up now, what I see, what I take from this session, and thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge on it, is that basically it is a good thing that we have a global supply chain, because it does, give quite a bit of security that it is all across the world and it is not concentrated in that every country has its little production unit, but we're facing problems. And I think what I really liked about your contributions is the way that it is all about sharing information and getting the information right to predict the right things, and not just go for a panicking situation, but really look at the situation, in a general way, and then try to mitigate the problems by not exaggerating demands. I think also newer techniques that allow a free flow of APIs and more stable manufacturing clearly seems very useful for the future. And also, I think another thing is that it is a global supply, and that all countries have been affected by it. It is not just now an inequity because of low and middle income countries versus high income. Everybody was affected, and of course higher income countries had more possibilities to adjust, but has shown that we all facing the same problem. It is really a global supply chain that we're all part of, and the only way forward and be able to adjust is by working together and exchanging information. And I hope this webinar has been helpful for you to listen to. You are absolutely welcome to reach out to FIP and or the hospital pharmacy section and or all the speakers for information. We will be sharing the webinar, but we will definitely also be sharing information that is available from the different regions. And we really ask you to contribute and send any good initiatives that you have. Share them with us so we can share it with the other members of the FIP community. So with that, I would really again like to thank Julie for being a panelist, and Michael and Sohail. I'm sorry about the line, Sohail, that we didn't have all the input from you that we could have had, but thank you so much for being there. All the participants, thank you so much for taking the time to listening to this webinar. Thank you for attending, and the recording will be available. Please share it with friends and colleagues. And I hope to see you at other webinars or at events from FIP. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.